Welcome back to Thought and Perspective, everybody. I have family doctor. I know you like to say family doctor, right? Family doctor Scott Jensen. Appreciate you being here. I want to get your thought and your perspective on COVID variants. I mean, I've seen some numbers really recently of COVID diminishing in the stats, 44%. And they have to scream about this COVID variant that they found.
That's a great question, and it's on everybody's mind. I've talked to many people about the whole concept of fear, and it does seem like there's this fear formula where if you frighten people and you exaggerate things and you accuse others and then you repeat the cycle, at some point in time you really get people so amped up that they're just not able to think for themselves.
And it causes division too. Not only do they not think for themselves, it's like, I'm on this side, you're on this side, and now we're not going to even get together and have a conversation about it.
And I think it can even cause a downturn in our health because when we're anxious and frustrated and fearful, our immune system isn't as strong. Studies have demonstrated that. But getting back to the variants, we need to remember one thing. We're dealing with COVID-19. This is a respiratory virus. It's an RNA virus. It's a single-stranded RNA virus. What does that mean? Well, it means that we would want to look at that single-stranded RNA respiratory virus and say, what can we compare it to? Well, it makes no sense to compare it to syphilis because that's a bacteria having no relationship to it. Mm-hmm. We wouldn't compare it to Ebola because it isn't comparable. We would compare it to what is the closest thing like it, and that would be influenza. So let's talk about influenza and COVID-19. What happens with influenza strains, viruses? We know they mutate. Now, let's just be sensible about this. If a virus does nothing but kill its host, it's not going to get very far. And that's why the Ebola outbreaks that we've seen haven't gotten very far, because making the diagnosis is not too difficult. And we know that it's transmitted generally through direct contact. And it's also lethal at the rate of 50% or more. So the Ebola virus may get its satisfaction by killing its host, but it's going to go down with it. Mm-hmm. Now, fast forward, let's talk about COVID. COVID wants to mutate in a direction like influenza, downwards, meaning less virulent, less likely to kill. That way, the virus gets to live, it gets to survive, it gets to get transmitted from one block of people to another. That's what normally happens. We normally get mutation downward or in a decreasing virulence. That may well be happening now. We know that variant strains are going to be identified. We have 3 of them right now. We've got the UK one, we've got the South Africa one, and we've got the Brazil one. I would advise people, don't be too impressed when we attach fancy names to them. I think right now we're calling the UK one B1117. Well, sounds like a bomber.
You know, people originally, when they were calling it the China virus, they were saying that's racist, and now they're calling it Brazil. I mean, which is it, people?
Yeah, which is it? Regardless, we have...
Had to put a chuckle in there, Scott.
Amen.
I'm sorry.
We put Dr. Fauci and Dr. Osterholm on the TV, and one says, ooh, this is really concerning. I'm afraid this is going to bust right through those people who've already had COVID or bust right through the kind of protection we might get from our vaccine. And the other guy says, no, it doesn't look like that's happening at all. It looks like we're going to continue to have the immunity that we're hoping for. So I think sometimes the best thing we can say is we don't know. So if we don't know, then let's be calm, rational, try to stay internally as powerful as we can from an immune perspective. Vitamin C, D, zinc, do some meditating, get some sleep, get off the couch, take a walk, do all that kind of good stuff. But then in regards to the variants, keep doing the common sense stuff. Don't touch your eyes, your nose, your mouth. Don't go to work if you're sick or you have a fever, you're coughing. Physical distancing is a good idea. I think the question on masks, it looks like it may mitigate somewhat. It probably doesn't get us the kind of protection that we're hoping for. So I would encourage people, don't think that because you have a mask on or someone else does, that you're absolutely protected, because I don't think we have that kind of evidence. But the bottom line is with the variants, time will tell. At the present time, we don't know. There's good evidence that the vaccine is going to provide the kind of immunity we're hoping for against the variants. There's good evidence that for someone like me who's already had COVID-19 and has IgG antibodies, then my antibodies are going to do the job and they would protect me against the variant. We're not seeing that the variant actually causes any more severe disease. There's a question as to whether or not there might be a heightened transmissibility. I don't think we know that yet. So for now, I think it's reasonable to let the scientists do their work. And we can stay tuned, but I don't think we need to be frightened. I really don't.
You look at the death toll, but I'm gonna kind of go not down conspiracy, but if you John Hopkins came out with that the numbers. 2020 numbers were not really that different than 2019 death numbers. They weren't really that different than 2018 death numbers. Are we mislabeling some of this?
Well, I think that's a concern to be sure. And I've certainly had concerns about that in regards to death certificates. And are we using COVID-19 as a cause of death in situations that we've never used before, like with influenza? So I'm certainly concerned about that. I think we need to look at all-cause mortality for a given year, and you're talking about that. Johns Hopkins is as well. And I know Tony Robbins recently came out with a tweet.
Yeah.
And I saw that, and I think it was called a truth bomb or something.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is, I have not seen the actual data looking at it, but I know that generally we have somewhere around 2.8 million deaths per year in America. And with each year, we get a few more, in part because our population's increasing. We do know that in 2019, that was a relatively soft year for influenza deaths. That might mean that there were more fragile, vulnerable people that were, if you will, continuing to enjoy life into 2020. It might mean that if you have a soft year in 2019 and then you have a bad respiratory virus come in like COVID or influenza, that you might have a bigger death count. We know that in 2020 to start with, it looked like we were going to have a pretty severe influenza, but that thing went away just like that once COVID came into the door. And I'm not exactly sure what that means. But to your point, it's now February. We should start to get decent data. We should be able to look at that all-cause mortality. I think that there is no question we have changed the rules in terms of how we identify the underlying cause of death, and that will distort and, if you will, corrupt the quality of data we have. And we're going to have to try to walk that back. I think audits would be one way to get that done, because we really do want to compare apples to apples.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense for us to look at 2020 and think that we are on the way to curing heart disease because we have so many less heart disease
30%,
deaths.
a 30-year low.
Exactly. The next thing that's going to happen is a pharmaceutical company is going to come out and say, see, that new drug we came out with and we're charging you an arm and a leg.
Right.
It's changing everything. It's making all the difference in the world.
Yeah.
When the fact of the matter is it may not have anything to do with anything.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to have to pay attention and just stay tuned.
Because COVID variant, that's what people are really concerned about. Like they're thinking, okay, we're at 400 and some odd thousand deaths right now. We have this variant coming in. We're going to be at 1.5 million now because of all this. So that's why I wanted to bring that up. So I appreciate that.
Well, and I would say, did we really have the data that shows us that we had this big Thanksgiving surge? Did we really have the data come forward that show we had this big Christmas surge? I mean, you can massage data and statistics and make it look like, see, there was this little thing. That was that darn Thanksgiving. People were getting together as families. If you actually look at a lot of the really sharp analysts around the country, I think there's a pretty strong opinion that both Thanksgiving and Christmas passed without any kind of humongous surge. But that isn't stopping Dr. Fauci from coming out and saying, oh boy, this weekend with the Super Bowl, oh my stars, right around Valentine's Day, all hell's going to break loose. I'm sorry, Dr. Fauci, please muzzle it.
Yeah.
Let's just be thoughtful and let a few days pass. We've scared people enough. Please, that's not doing anything. Sorry, Dr. Fauci.
Yeah. Let's talk about masks on another day. Does that work?
That sounds good. I think masks, we're still going to get more data, but we'll get better data once we get on the other side of this COVID pandemic, because then we'll get data that starts to resemble science more, where we'll actually observe, measure, hypothesize, create experiments to confirm or deny, and then move on. And we'll try to get reproduction of those kinds of data conclusions from other persons, other scientists, other clinics in another setting. We need to get away from having too much of our own internal bias prematurely determine what our conclusions are going to be.
I agree. Our confirmation bias, as I like to word it, is strong, right?
Yes, it is.
It's pretty wild.
Thanks, Matt.
Dr. Jensen, thanks for being here.
You're very welcome.